Right, back in here on GCR as we've been doing this for the last week or so. We're going to continue doing this. We had Brandon Scott in yesterday. We had TJ Smith in last week. Later today, Sheila Dixon's going to be stopping by. But it's a pleasure. I've actually never met our next guest. It's the first time that I've had a conversation with him. He's someone that has been very interesting. I think a lot of people didn't know who he was, and then all of a sudden they said, wow, he's leading the poll for mayor. This is crazy. And so I'm glad that we get to have him in here to talk to him a little bit more. He is Thiru Vignarajah, and he's with us here in the Live Casino Hotel studio. Thiru, it's so good to see you, sir. Thank you for coming in this morning.
Happy to be here. Excited to have a conversation that doesn't revolve exclusively around crime and audit.
Right,
so
right. Now, in fairness, as I always say to everybody, I get, like, this stuff is not as important as some of the other things that you're looking to deal with as mayor, but I think some of it ends up walking hand in hand with some of the issues that you're dealing with as you try to become our next mayor.
Absolutely. And I was just saying a moment ago, there was a period of time during the Ravens Stadium where I'd go out to audiences and I'd say, guys, I'm sure you're as frustrated as I am. Nothing seems to be working in Baltimore City. And I'd almost ask rhetorically, raise your hand and shout something out that's working. The schools, the police department, shout something out. And after a long, awkward pause, someone would break the ice and say, Matthew Judon or Lamar Jackson
right,
or
that's
the
what we got.
Ravens.
That's what we got. Yeah.
And that was what we got. And the fact that people could at least come around and have a little bit of hopefulness around that was really important for the morale of the city.
I feel like if elected, like what you do in order to try to project for the rest of the country that Baltimore is, you just put pictures of Lamar everywhere, right? That's just exactly the way that it works, right? Like, bring your business to Baltimore because this is what we've got. Yeah.
And even when we lost, I made a joke that I said, whoever is mayor, one of us is going to be able to pledge that the Ravens will win a Super Bowl on their watch.
You know what?
I'm
actually
not an unreasonable promise.
Right?
I will take that pledge all day. And
all right, I'm going to start with. I'm actually going to start with the Orioles, and I'm going to start with a topic that I guess generically there has been some concern. The Orioles, there is no lease right now. It's going to come up. A lot of people are of the belief, hey, that's just a formality. It will get done. There have been these weird sort of percolating what could happen with the Orioles. This is something that you are going to have to deal with as you become mayor if elected. Are you concerned at all about the future of the Baltimore Orioles generically?
Generically, no.
Okay.
Look, I think that the folks in charge have said all the right things. I think there's all sorts of very good reasons to keep him here. I don't think there's any real risk.
When you say are you specifically saying you take John Angelos at his word?
I do.
Yeah, okay.
I do. There's if he wanted to start, laying the seeds for a negotiation, there's other signals he could have sent to the market to try to suggest that was going to have to be a conversation. However, I don't like taking any chances, and I don't want to take anything for granted. I was at the Billy Joel concert, and so many people came up to me and said, this is the first time Camden Yards has been full in years. And it was sort of alarming to think, and yes, the Orioles have had some struggles for a while, but attendance has never been lower. And that has got to have to do with not just the fact that, we're rebuilding, but also the fact that people have some nervousness about coming downtown between the squeegee boys and the headlines involving carjackings and killings. The perception of Baltimore is profoundly damaged right now, and that affects everyone, including the Orioles.
So let's talk about that, because I think there's two ways of looking at that. Is the problem the perception, or is the problem the reality? Because what you're alluding to is the need to get more people to come downtown, which isn't just for the Orioles. That's not their issue. It's about the downtown businesses that clearly are all being impacted by people not being at the games. And I do agree, hey, look, winning baseball games goes a long way into improving that, but the things that you bring up, is it a perception problem that we have to change the perception, or is it a reality problem? Which one of those is the bigger issue?
It is a perception problem that is driven by a profoundly real reality problem. I always say, look, if you want to change the narrative of Baltimore, if you want to change the perception of the city, you've got to change the underlying reality. We have the highest murder rate in America of any major city. If you cut it in half, literally, if you cut it in half tomorrow, we'd still be the third deadliest city in America. I mean, that's how off the charts we are. So to pretend that it's just the wire that is driving people's concerns about the city, it's just not true. And our city politicians have chalked this up to the media's misrepresenting us. You can't misrepresent having the highest per capita homicide rate in the country, having carjacking spike by 40%. Those are real concerns. And the squeegee boys are on every corner. They are a source of frustration and nervousness. Are they the biggest problem in Baltimore? No. But it's a symbol of lawlessness and chaos that I don't think helps when you're trying to get people to come downtown, to spend their money downtown, to enjoy a game at the ballpark, to come down and eat at our restaurants. It does add up, and I think right now that perception problem is fueled by a very real concern rooted in reality.
Is there additionally a transportation problem in trying to get people to come to games? Is there, I think for a long time we've all dealt with the public transportation topic, but I don't think in this context, when we talk about people going to games, I don't think we talk about it enough, which is that in a lot of major cities, it could not be easier for you to take public transportation to a game. There are systems for doing it in Baltimore, but it's not quite as easy as it is in most major American cities.
I always say you got to sequence these problems. Fixing a city is a marathon and a sprint. In the short term, reducing and addressing crime has got to be our top priority.
Sure.
But you got to, walk and chew gum. And you got to lay some of these seeds about rebuilding our public transit grid so we get there in the 5 to 10 year horizon. But let's be honest, when Camden Yards first opened, we had that consecutive sellout.
No question, right.
I mean, we had the same public transit deficits then that we do now, but people filled that stadium up because the perception of the team, the perception of the city was just fundamentally different. We can get there and fill that stadium up by changing the perception and getting the kind of team that the city has had and deserves. But we absolutely need to rebuild that public transit grid, especially around those stadiums.
All right. He's Thiru Vignarajah. He's with us here in the Live Casino Hotel studio. Also, speaking of downtown, there's a building where, look, as I keep saying, every time I bring this topic up, I want to make it very clear. This is not a knock on Frank Remish. This is not a knock on his team. And we need to keep talking about the miracle that is what they've done over the course of the last decade with Royal Farms Arena. There should be a book written about what they've done with this facility and how they've made it work and how they brought in major events. It's unbelievable what's happened.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, where are you with the need for a new arena, with the idea of rebuilding or renovating the current facility? It's a topic that, again, percolates every few years around here and then just kind of goes away because there's no immediate idea that there's going to be an NBA team or an NHL team coming, so we just sort of forget about it and say, hey, look, the place was packed last night for Celine Dion, everything's good.
Yep. Let me say two things. One, you're absolutely right about Frank. Talk about, we city politicians, we leaders talk about doing more with less. This is an illustration in what actual leadership can do. I mean, that was a night and day change because of an ownership change. I mean, this is what can be accomplished. The other thing that I want to say, though, is we haven't done this in a lot of different contexts, these sort of long-term investments that are needed to rebuild and reimagine a city. One of the stories I love sharing about Baltimore, it's not sports-related, but just bear with me for a second, is about how we built the first leg of the American Railroad. New York City and Baltimore City, because of our harbors, competed for commerce. New York City, got to give them credit, built the second greatest infrastructure project in American history. They dug the Erie Canal. We, in response, built the first leg of the American Railroad. And we did it because leaders realized they needed to make investments even though they wouldn't be at the ribbon cutting. They weren't going to be at the press conference. They wouldn't even ride the first train because they would be gone by then. But they made those investments anyway. We just don't think like that anymore. We don't think about these big commitments. The Preakness is the first one in a long time where people, when forced to reckon with it, are now reckoning with it. But nobody
We're getting to that. We're going to talk more about that.
And so when you think about this, I got to tell you, we've got to get the population decline under control. It's really hard to justify these major infrastructure investments when you're about to be the only city in America that is declining in population and is smaller in 2020 than we were in 1920. That is a terrible problem to have. But if we're going to start getting this city on track, we start changing the trajectory of crime, we start making some of these investments, a reimagined convention center, reimagined arena is got to be in the sort of 5 to 10 year horizon.
Okay. Do you feel as though there is private support? Again, being plugged in as you are in the city, do you feel as though the private support is there that if it's just, as mayor, it's an issue that you take seriously and you push for, it can happen during or at least a plan in place during the course of your term?
The short answer is yes, but there's two qualifications. I think our private sector is frustrated and borderline embarrassed by our city politicians. I think they look at the leadership in city council, they look at the leadership in city hall, and they say, these are folks that have basically waged war against our private sector for years. And the appetite for investing in this city, despite the fact that it's got all these amazing things, is low, because they look at these partners and they think, these are the folks that couldn't run a lemonade stand, and now they're expecting to run the city. And I don't mean to be impolite about it, but I think they're frustrated. I mean, these are their frustrations. But the other piece of it is that there are so many things going for Baltimore that if you just change the trajectory a little, I think private investment would flood in. You've got a city that has got a 40% vacancy rate. It is, just north of D.C., not that far south of Philadelphia and New York. You've got a deep water port, 2 major sports franchises, anchor institutions like Hopkins and the University of Maryland, this rich, diverse history, this affluent suburb. You've got assets that are the envy of other cities across the nation, and they would love to invest if they saw the right trend lines. Crime starts going down just a little bit. Real estate values start going up just a little bit. Taxes come down just a little bit. I think you will see a flood of private-public partnership opportunities that just don't exist right now because they look at the partners and they don't like who's across the table.
It sounds like what you're saying is, yes, this can happen. It might take a little bit. We need to put a few things in place. Right. And then we can go. Is that sort of where?
Exactly right. And this could be 18 months. I think if you see a significant change in the crime trajectory, which is what we've pledged to do, go back. It wasn't ancient history. It was 2011, 2012. We had murders below 200. And if you get to that kind of trajectory, I think everybody looks and says, wow, look at the depressed real estate values. What an opportunity to jump in here and get ahead of the game. Private investors like seeing what they think nobody else sees. If they start seeing the right trend lines in the first 9 months to 18 months, I think you're going to see a flood of terrific investment and a huge set of opportunities for us to partner with them and rebuild all sorts of things. Our roads and bridges are literally crumbling into the ground. Our water and sewage system is in violation of federal law. Our schools are twice as old as the schools in the rest of the state, and our stadiums, our convention centers. There is tremendous promise and potential for a city that is so close to D.C. but is so cheap compared to other, Eastern Seaboard cities. I think it could be an amazing opportunity for all the reasons that we know and love Baltimore. But right now, that's not what the investors see. They see people that have been waging war against them. When we get to Pimlico, I'll give you sort of a great example of that.
Well, let's talk about that. This is Thiru Vignarajah is in studio with us as we continue our GCR Mayoral Forum. So obviously, if you are elected, before you take office, it seems like this will probably have already come to a head. This Preakness Pimlico
I am cautiously optimistic.
So I guess that's where I wanted to start, right? Like the plan as constituted, as you've seen. Are you on board with this plan as being what's best for Baltimore, what's best for Maryland moving forward? As mayor, does it have your thumbs up that this is what's best for our city?
Yeah. By and large, yes.
Okay.
I mean, what I had said in a opinion piece that I wrote in the Baltimore Business Journal before this deal was done, I said, look, there's basically 4 things we need to do. Number 1, we have to drop this ridiculous lawsuit that we have filed. It is unmeritorious and irresponsible to do this, and I'll come back to that. Number 2, we need to make sure that there is investment in the community and some revenue sharing opportunities as well. Number 3, we have to make sure that we are creating a facility that is year-round, that is able to, host concerts and 5Ks, that just has a lot more purposes than just being a horse track. And number 4, it has to stay in Baltimore. There has to be a permanent commitment to that. A few weeks later, the negotiations began. I don't think folks know, and I imagine a lot of your listeners may not know, what precipitated this lawsuit. It's really remarkable. Our city leaders, led by Catherine Pugh, but all the folks that we're running against were right there, filed a lawsuit that basically said, we're going to use eminent domain to take your facility. Your listeners may know this. The last time Baltimore City did that,
it'd be the Baltimore Colts.
That's exactly right. And it precipitated a prompt retreat
very quickly.
And people think it was like some unimagined evil thing that the Colts did. We forced their hand. And we did the same kind of scare tactic.
They're still evil. Let me make that. You're not getting that one over on me, Thiru. You're not coming in here and saying Bob Irsay isn't still evil.
Right,
My father would never forgive me if I allowed that to just stand.
Fair enough. But I think we had a hand to play in that. And I think here we pushed Pimlico in a way that was just irresponsible. To take that lawsuit back was the first precondition. And frankly, soon after we laid it out, the case for why we were going to end up having to pay the lawyers' fees when we lost that lawsuit, which was inevitable, suddenly everybody started turning things around. Why we didn't see that coming was profoundly frustrating to me. But then we created the climate to actually have a negotiation. Everybody wants Preakness to stay here. This is, one of the crown jewels of Baltimore. It's the one, bright spot that we have every year for the national news to see what Baltimore is and can be.
And also tangible dollars.
Absolutely.
You're right. And I do think it's important that we talk about the side of it where, hey, when you bring up early in the conversation, a lot of people think of us as The Wire.
Yeah.
It's nice to have this, but tangibly,
absolutely,
there's nothing else that we're doing annually that has as much of an economic impact.
Absolutely. And if you look at our city, and you look at cities across the country that have been able to turn the corner, part of what they do is they make investments. Part of what they do is they have anchor institutions in certain neighborhoods that are struggling. In East Baltimore, it's Johns Hopkins. In West Baltimore, it's the University of Maryland. But when you get up to Park Heights area, there isn't an anchor up there, and Pimlico and Preakness could be it. We should have, frankly, reimagined this a decade ago. We didn't, because of the sort of same approach that has put us in this position, failing to sort of think long term.
Mm-hmm.
You need a strategic vision for not just the next 2 or 3 years, but for the next 20 or 30 years. That's how we built the American Railroad. That's how we built the stadiums that we now are the anchors of the downtown. That's exactly what needs to happen up there. I am optimistic. There's all sorts of indications that there is some incompetent negotiations on our side, but I am optimistic that the basic framework and the momentum and, frankly, political pressure to get this done will make sure that it gets done even before I get there.
Okay, so now it comes hand in hand with another issue, which is sports betting.
Yeah.
Which, again, appears as though it's going to be something that's going to be headed towards the ballot this November and could also have found, an answer before you're ever involved in this process. But I think specifically where sports betting meets is with the tracks and is with the idea that the tracks are going to say, hey, look, we got screwed the last time.
Yeah.
The reason why we're in this predicament is because when we did slots, you said we're not putting them at the tracks, and we were left with the same garbage that we had to deal with beforehand. We can't allow that to happen again with sports betting, whereas the casinos are going to sit back and say, okay, well, in this agreement, we are kind of the losers. Might be better for everybody else, but we're kind of the losers in this agreement that you're all coming up with in order to be able to keep the Preakness here and to revitalize Pimlico. So we need to demand that we get the sports betting here and nowhere else to make up for what it is that we're giving in this process. So where are you with sports betting as a whole, but more specifically where we have sports betting within the city?
Yeah. So look, there's a political question and there's a business negotiation. I think you sort of framed it well there. The political question is this something that should happen? It's going to happen. I think it is a trend line that is going to be very, very difficult to resist. And just like casinos, it looks like the ball is rolling. What I think it does is present an opportunity for a negotiation. Everybody wants it, and we get to decide who gets it.
Right.
And I think what we have to do is frame this as a negotiation from the taxpayers and the citizens' perspective vis-a-vis the tracks, the stadiums, the franchises, the sport football.
Absolutely, right.
All of these folks are the people that want in on this.
No doubt.
What do you do in a situation like that? You've got the goods, they want it. What do? You have a negotiation that says who's got the best deal. And here's what's important. The frustration and skepticism and cynicism that the casinos engendered by basically making a pledge and being sold to the people of Maryland as a way to create more money for education, and then seeing that money not actually delivered, I think has left a bad taste in the mouth of a lot of people. And so one of the things that I think we have to do is to make sure that it is crystal clear that will not happen again. We're not going to sell you a bill of goods on the basis that this is going to help the poor, help the kids, or help us address climate change, and then it not go to that particular thing.
Right.
The second thing, though, is you need to actually have folks that know how to engage in negotiations. One of my I think strong advantages vis-a-vis the other campaigns is I've had other jobs. A lot of the city politicians, that's what they do. They are politicians. They hold press conferences. They deliver sound bites. I was a federal and city prosecutor.
Yep.
I was president of the Harvard Law Review and a Supreme Court clerk. I'm a partner at a major law firm. I was at McKinsey before. I was deputy attorney general. I think those roles and responsibilities put you in a position to lead a city that has got a lot of complex things. Am I the one who's going to be handling the negotiation? No. We're going to have a team of people that are going to set us up for that. But at some point, there's going to be a conversation where you're going to have to send the mayor in to a negotiation, whether it's with the CEO of Amazon or the Stronach Group or whoever it is that's going to come to the table with respect to sports betting. There needs to be someone who's walking into that room prepared for that role. And I think one of the frustrations of the people of Baltimore is for too long we've had folks that are ill-suited to that responsibility. But I think that negotiation is a tremendous opportunity. I think sports betting is going to happen. It's a big opportunity for the city and for the state. We just need to make sure we capitalize on it for the good of the people and have the kind of hard negotiations so that you're not negotiating with a donor who gave you a big check and therefore you owe them something. You need to go in there and have a hard-nosed negotiation the way that any other business person would. You're not a politician in that mode. You're a person who's negotiating on behalf of the people of Baltimore for the best deal and that we can get.
Are you worried about the new Pimlico if it doesn't involve sports betting? Are you worried that you're setting up this new, again, all these other things we're talking about with this facility and what you want to do? Are you worried that you're setting it up for failure if it doesn't involve the ability to have sports betting?
If we do it right, the answer is no.
Okay.
What we should be doing is creating a facility that is a standalone facility. Imagine a world where sports betting wasn't on the horizon. We would still need Pimlico and Preakness to work, right? Just imagine you're 5 years ago, sports betting is not on your horizon. We would be talking about a facility that needed to be able to, pay its bills and be profitable.
Find other events.
Exactly. By itself. That's the way they should approach it. Nobody should take sports betting for granted and build that into their revenue stream. That's what allows us to have a negotiation to say, look, you're doing great. You could be doing even better, but here's what you're going to have to give us to make that happen. I think we have an opportunity if we make the kinds of investments that cities have to make. Cities have to rebuild the roads. Cities have to reduce crime. Cities have to build the train, even though they wouldn't be the one riding it. I think our leaders have failed to appreciate that, and they think instead, the Stronach Group, if they donate to my campaign, they're going to get a good deal. We got to end that. When I say I didn't want to come here and talk about crime and audits, it's because that kind of lack of transparency has been a source of frustration, and it's put us in a position where we're not making the best deal for Baltimore. You're making the best deal for a politician who wants to get reelected. When I was deputy attorney general, we sometimes had outside counsel come in, but it wasn't me calling up my buddies in the legal world and saying, hey, do you want in on this? They had to submit blind bids that outline their cost structure, that's the kind of negotiations that leaders have on behalf of the people of Baltimore and the state of Maryland. That's what we need to make sure happens here.
I love it. He is Thiru Vignarajah. He is a candidate for mayor through social media, websites, all those things.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thiru2020.com. I sometimes make the joke it's common spelling, but I think Thiru's an unusual name. It's THIRU 2020.com, and it's Thiru 4 Baltimore on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're really, really excited to see Baltimore become the city it is destined to be, and strong leadership and a commitment to all of these cultural institutions, from the Orioles to the Walters to the Ravens to Royal Farms and Pimlico, is got to be part of the future of Baltimore.